Beneath the stormy skies of the Aegean Sea, where ancient winds whispered the names of gods and kings, an epic tragedy began to unfold. This was no mere war for land, nor simply for honor. It was a war driven by desire, vanity, and vengeance, born from the whims of the gods and sealed by the failures of men. Between divine promises and human oaths, Troy would become the stage for one of the most brutal and legendary tales in all of Greek mythology. Here, names like Hector, Ajax, Odysseus, Agamemnon, and Menelaus carved their fates in blood and glory. But among them all, none burned brighter or fell harder than Achilles, the most feared, the most glorious, and the most lethal warrior of them all. Today, we remember the moment when his rage and sorrow echoed through the centuries and turned him into a legend. Subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and get ready, because the legend of the Trojan War begins now. When the gods sowed war. According to Greek mythology, the Trojan War took place in the 13th century before the Common Era, and the final 52 days from the 10th and final year of the war are the ones told in the Iliad, the epic poem attributed to a man named Homer. But both Homer and Troy are wrapped in mystery. Some believe Homer was a lone poet who wove together the beliefs of the Greek people into a single masterpiece. Others think the name Homer was a collective symbol, used over time to represent generations of anonymous storytellers. Even if he truly lived, Homer was not a contemporary of the war. He would have lived many centuries later. What kept the myth alive was the oral tradition of the ancient Greeks. After all, written history did not yet exist, and the gods explained everything. In ancient Greece, gods and mortals walked side by side, spears that missed their mark, arrows that veered away, heroes who escaped by a breath. It was all seen as divine will, never mere coincidence. Some say the war itself was part of Zeus's plan to reduce the human population. Whether or not that was his intention, Zeus was there at the beginning of it all. It began with Eris, goddess of discord. Offended for not being invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, she sent a gift, a golden apple, known as the Apple of Discord, meant for the fairest of the goddesses. In some versions, the title is Most Just, but the result was the same. Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite entered into rivalry for the prize. Zeus, ever the careful diplomat, refused to choose and risk angering the others. So he handed the decision to a mortal, Paris, son of King Priam of Troy, although at that time Paris didn't know his true identity. He lived as a shepherd. Each goddess made him an offer. Athena promised wisdom and victory in battle. Hera offered power and wealth. And Aphrodite? She promised the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose love. And Aphrodite kept her word. She made Helen, daughter of Zeus, and considered the most beautiful of all mortal women, fall in love with him. But Helen was already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. Helen had long been the object of many suitors. To avoid conflict, they made a pact. Whoever won her hand would receive the full support of the others, an idea suggested by Odysseus, also known as Ulysses. Menelaus was chosen. In some versions, he even promised oxen as an offering to Aphrodite, but forgot to fulfill his vow. Later, once Paris learned of his royal blood, he was sent to Sparta on a diplomatic mission. And when he left, he took Helen with him. She waited for her husband to be away, left a servant in her place, and sailed away with Paris aboard Trojan ships. And so, because of a golden apple and a forbidden love, the gods sowed a war that would forever mark the names of gods, kings and heroes. The fury of men, the siege of kings. When Menelaus discovered that Helen had fled with Paris, his reaction was immediate: rage, humiliation, and a thirst for vengeance. But he wasn't alone. He called upon his brother, Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae, who ruled much of Greece through influence and force, and who also saw in Troy an opportunity for conquest. Soon, the Greek kings who had once sworn to defend Helen's marriage were summoned. Sparta, Athens, Rhodes, Crete, Arcadia, Magnesia, cities from across the Hellenic world sent their warriors, and Agamemnon himself led the expedition. It's said that thousands of ships set sail, some small, with 50 warriors aboard, others larger, carrying twice that number. It was a staggering force by the standards of the time, a war machine the world had never seen. And they weren't marching alone. Agamemnon had divine backing: Athena, Hera, Hephaestus, Poseidon, and according to some versions, to win the favor of the winds and reach Troy safely, Agamemnon sacrificed his own daughter. Across the sea, Troy prepared. Helen was received by King Priam, and his eldest son, Prince Hector, commander of the Trojan army, took charge of the city's defense. Troy had a legendary wall, said to have been built by the gods Poseidon and Apollo, a wall that could not be broken, scaled, or destroyed. The Trojans had powerful allies: Phrygians, Thracians, Carians, and gods like Apollo, Aphrodite, Ares, and Leto. But the Greeks had yet to unleash their greatest weapon: Achilles. Son of Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, Achilles was dipped by his mother in the river Styx, gateway to the underworld. She held him by the heel, the only part that remained untouched. And so was born a nearly immortal warrior, described as the strongest and most handsome of all men. Before sailing to Troy, Achilles hesitated. His mother told him he had two paths: to go to war, win eternal glory, and die young, or stay, live a long life, and be forgotten. Achilles chose glory. Alongside his Myrmidons, he terrified enemies, but war pulled him into something deeper than battle. During one raid, his men sacked a temple of Apollo, killing priests and taking a young priestess prisoner, Briseis. She and Achilles grew close. Some say she held the place of a wife in his heart, but she wasn't the only one there. There was also Patroclus, young, brave, and beloved by Achilles. Their bond was deep. Were they brothers? Cousins? Lovers? It doesn't matter. What we do know is this: Achilles protected him like the most precious thing in his life. When the Greeks first landed, the invasion was a success. But as time passed, the wall still stood. Fatigue set in, followed by divisions and mutiny. The breaking point came with a clash between Agamemnon and Achilles. Briseis was taken by force, and Achilles refused to keep fighting. Their pride became a burden to the army. Without Achilles, Greek morale collapsed, and the Trojans began to push forward. Then Menelaus proposed a duel with Paris, Helen as the prize. But the fight was a disaster. Paris struck first, but his spear barely scratched Menelaus's shield. Menelaus's counterattack nearly pierced his armor. At the last moment, Aphrodite intervened, cloaked Paris in mist, and carried him back to Troy. The siege dragged on. In another attack, Patroclus begged to fight. Achilles, exhausted by the pleas, or perhaps mockingly resigned, allowed it. He lent him his armor and let him lead the Myrmidons. Some say Achilles gave him one order: do not go to the gates of Troy. But he did, and he was killed. Wounded in battle, Patroclus fell to Hector, who believed he was striking down Achilles himself. When Achilles learned what had happened, he was consumed by rage. The god Hephaestus forged him new armor, made of gold, silver, and bronze. His shield was a world, and his helmet blazed with a golden crest. Hector, knowing what was coming, did not flee. He stood outside the walls of Troy and waited. The duel was brief. Hector fell, a spear through his throat. Achilles tied his body to his chariot and dragged it around the city walls. He refused funeral rites. He refused peace. But then, Priam, the old king, disguised in rags, entered the Greek camp. On his knees, he begged to bury his son. And for the first time in what felt like an age, Achilles relented. Wooden horse, glory, and ruin. Even with Hector dead, the Greeks could not break through the walls of Troy. The war had dragged on for years, and patience was wearing thin, until Odysseus proposed an idea that would change everything. He suggested they cut oak from the nearby forests and, in secret, build a giant wooden horse. Then, they would fake a retreat, leaving the strange gift behind on the shore. And that's exactly what they did. The Greek army vanished overnight. Only one man, Sinon, stayed behind. He told the Trojans that the Greeks had left, but first offered a tribute to the goddess Athena, hoping to avoid her wrath should they return someday. The Trojans hesitated. Some were suspicious and warned it was a trap. Others wanted to burn the horse immediately. But most were convinced that destroying a sacred offering would be sacrilege. So they dragged the massive structure into the city. What they didn't know was that inside the horse hid elite soldiers. When night fell and Troy slept, the men emerged from the wooden beast, killed the guards, opened the gates, and the Greek army, which had only been hiding, stormed into the city. What followed was a massacre. Men were slaughtered. Women and children who survived were enslaved. The city was set ablaze. Few escaped. Among the survivors was Aeneas, who, according to legend, carried his father on his back all the way to the Italian peninsula, where he would go on to found the city of Alba Longa. It's said that his descendants would later establish Rome. King Priam was killed, and Paris, upon seeing Achilles inside the city, fired an arrow, guided by Apollo, that struck the warrior's heel, the only vulnerable part of his body, the same body that had taken his brother's life. Some versions say the arrow was poisoned. Achilles fell. The war was over. Agamemnon survived, but upon returning home, he was murdered in a plot led by his own wife, still haunted by the sacrifice of their daughter, and by rivals hungry for the throne. Menelaus, meanwhile, found Helen once more and could not resist her beauty. He brought her back to Sparta, as if nothing had happened. For centuries, this tale was seen as pure myth. But in the 18th century, archaeologists began to suspect that Troy might have actually existed. In the region of Anatolia, in what is now Turkey, ruins were discovered. Remnants of a fortified city destroyed around 1200 before the Common Era. Among the debris were signs of fire, arrowheads, and slings lodged in the walls. Could this be the real Troy? No one knows for certain. It's possible that the events described by Homer are a blend of historical facts and poetic embellishment. The city may have stood near the Dardanelles Strait, a strategic route between the Aegean and the Black Sea, which would explain the Greeks' desire to control the region. The myth may be a fusion of many wars, fought over many centuries. One of the earliest historians, Thucydides, believed there had been a war between Greeks and Trojans, but thought Homer inflated the numbers and deeds to make the story more glorious. And, in truth, the list of characters, battles, and versions is vast. There was no way to cover them all here. But you can help continue the story in the comments. Share the name of your favorite hero or heroine. and keep this ancient legend alive. According to tradition, the fall of Troy and the offense to the gods provoked their wrath. Storms ravaged the Greek ships, and many never returned. Among the survivors was Odysseus, the mastermind behind the horse, whose long journey home would take many years and become another legend in its own right, the story we know as the Odyssey. But that is a tale for another time. This was just a glimpse. The legend of Troy runs as deep as the Aegean. Want more? Open a book. But if this story gripped you, like, share, and subscribe. The next journey may be older, greater, or more real than you imagine. Until then, watch your heel. You never know where the next arrow may come from.